Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie, on this episode of CD Junkie. In honor, maybe to celebrate the release of the brand new Tears for Fears album, I'm going to go through my Tears for Fears CD collection. Now, I'm not going to be doing any of the solo releases. I'm just focusing on the band. I usually like to start these videos off by telling people how I got into the band. And that's probably because of KROQ in Los Angeles. They were an early supporter of the band and started playing things like Change, Pale Shelter, Mad World. And I fell in love with those songs, so I went out and bought the American album, which had a completely different cover than the UK cover. I prefer the UK cover. The American album looked like this. Now, oddly enough, I was a fan of Tears for Fears before Tears for Fears, actually, because Kurt and Roland used to be in a band called Graduate. They actually released their first recordings back in 1980, an album called Acting My Age. Now, this is the CD version, and it has a whole bunch of bonus tracks on it. I seem to remember that I had both an album and a 10-inch version of the release. Very mod. It's got a lot of ska in there. In fact, there's a song called Elvis Should Play Ska, and that is The Graduate. That came out in 1980. Now, of course, when Tears for Fears came around, their debut album was The Hurting, and boy, was this a complete change. The songs were just wonderful, but they were also very emotional, very deep. The sound was not just your standard typical synth pop that was happening at that time. There were a lot of layers to it. There were guitars. There were different kinds of rhythms, different things happening. This here is the first album. This, of course, includes Pale Shelter, Mad World, Change, and a whole lot of other great tracks. Here is the 2 CD deluxe version. There may be like a 3 or 4 CD version of this, but usually I can never afford those big time boxes, so I have to settle for the 2 CD versions. But The Hurting came out in 1983, a fabulous debut, and really set the tone for what was to come. But the great thing is they never made the same album twice. So by the time Songs from the Big Chair came out in 1985, they were a completely different band. They were mature, the production was bigger, the arrangements were bigger and more inventive, more dynamic, more creative. The songs weren't as instantly catchy as The Hurting, but after 3 listens you were hooked. I mean, on this album you get Shout, you get Everybody Wants to Rule the World, you get The Working Hour, Head Over Heels, and lots of great tracks. This here is the Deluxe Edition, and it contains lots of bonus tracks, so you get different mixes. There may have been a few different versions of this Deluxe Edition with different bonus tracks, but this is the one that I have. As I said, 7 inches and 12 inches and other bonus material. That album came out in 1985. 1989 brought their third album, The Seeds of Love. Now, this album, again, was a completely different album than the previous 2 albums. And it's just dynamic and it's panoramic and it makes a lot of huge steps forward. Now, if you look at that cover, of course, you're instantly going to think of maybe Sgt. Pepper. What you get, though, is not really that. Now, the single, Sowing the Seeds of Love, is just exactly what you expect by this picture. This Beatles song, but it's, bold and has all these changes. I mean, it's an epic single. It really is. Every time you hear it, you just have to sit down and listen to it because there's so many things going on in it. But the album was not really like that. The album actually isn't quite as good as the first 2 albums. There's some great songs, such as Sowing the Seeds of Love. Woman in Chains is one of their most passionate, beautiful songs. Advice for the Young at Heart. Those are the singles, and those are great tracks. There are some other great tracks on the album, but it does suffer a little bit from maybe overindulgence, like Bad Man Song. But it's not a bad album at all. I'm not saying that at all, but it's not as engaging. In fact, it takes a lot more listens to get into some of the other songs, like maybe Year of the Knife, it's a stellar album. It's a bold album, but it's not their best album. This 2 CD version includes the album plus singles and edits and all that kind of stuff. Again, I love that. But it's still a wonderful album and deserves to be heard. But don't expect it to all sound like Sowing the Seeds of Love, Woman in Chains, or Advice for the Young at Heart. All 3 are great tracks, though. Now, after this, the band sort of split. Kurt Smith went elsewhere. Roland Orzabal continued the band, and in 1993 put out Elemental. Now, Elemental is not a great album. It's a really, really good album. It sounds like Tears for Fears, but then it doesn't. It sounds like what was coming out in early 90s. The guitar was a little heavier than on previous Tears for Fears albums. Still a load of great tracks. The song that you're probably going to know from this album is wonderful. It's called Break It Down Again. There's a lot of great tracks on here, but again, they were doing different things. And if you're expecting this album to sound like anything before. I do still enjoy it, and there are people who got turned on to the band at this point who probably think of this as their favorite album. So I'm not going to disparage them at all. Still a fine collection of tracks that you definitely need to add to your collection. The next album was Raul and the Kings of Spain. That came out in 1995. Again, taking off where Elemental left off. One of my favorite Tears for Fears songs is on this album, actually, and it's called Falling Down. But this suffers from the same problems that Elemental did. It was Roland taking Tears for Fears in a different direction. Still very Tears for Fears, because Roland is writing the songs, and he's got a great voice. And I'm glad he was continuing the band and putting out this great music, but again, not one of my favorite Tears for Fears albums. Now, collectors were in luck in 1996 when a Saturnine, Marshall, and Lunatic came out, or it could be Saturnine. I'm not sure. I never asked. But this was a collection of B-sides, rarities. A lot of the stuff is really eclectic, instrumentals and things like that. So if you're looking for something where the band is being creative and realizing that, hey, this is going to be a B-side, so let's stretch out a little bit and do something different. This album is full of those kind of tracks. It also has a song called The Way You Are. It was a single that they released after The Hurting, but before Songs from the Big Chair. And since it wasn't a hit, that may have been the reason why it didn't make their second album. And it may have been one of the reasons why the band changed course for Songs from the Big Chair. But still, it's a great collection of B-sides and rarities. After that, Roland put Tears for Fears to rest for a little while. He recorded a solo album. In the meantime, Kurt had been recording solo albums, but they came back together in 2004 with the brilliant Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. Now, you all remember the song Sowing the Seeds of Love, right? And how it's this big pop opus, a nod to the Beatles and other 60s bands. Now, this is the album that song should have been on, because the album, The Seeds of Love, was actually a varied album. Every song sounded different, but here they were more focused. Lots of great songs. In fact, some of my favorite Tears for Fears songs are on this album. Call Me Mellow, Closest Thing to Heaven. And this version here, which has a slipcover, I think that might be the cover most people are familiar with there. This has 2 bonus tracks. I think there was a couple different versions of this album released. Different mixes, different bonus tracks. But this was a fantastic album. Came out in 2004. Like I said, this is the album that Sowing the Seeds of Love should have been on. If you love that single and you haven't really dug Tears for Fears before then, this is the album that you're probably really going to dig. It's very guitar-oriented and very melodic, and it's just an instantly wonderful, beautiful album. Came out in 2004. Now, they toured for this album. This album didn't get a lot of press for some reason, even though it was so great. Maybe it was because it was so different from what they had done. But then people have to remember, every Tears for Fears album has been different from the one before and the one after. Now, I normally don't talk about live releases, but this one is kind of special. This is a French release called Secret World. And what it is, it's a live album, but it has a couple studio tracks at the end. One of the tracks is called Floating Down the River, which totally sounds like it could have been on Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. Just wonderful. It only ended up as a B-side, and they added it to this. And another strange thing they did is they added a song called What Are We Fighting For?, which is yet another beautiful, bold, wonderful Beatlesque influenced track. And it's clearly one of the best things that Kurt Smith recorded as a solo artist on his Mayfield release. So they added it to a Tears for Fears release, but they didn't say by Kurt Smith or Mayfield by the band. They just sort of made it like it was Tears for Fears. But whatever, I'm perfectly fine with it. Now, several years later, the band were trying to work on new material. In the meantime, they put out a compilation called Rule the World, which featured 2 brand new songs as well as songs from the previous albums. Of course, I'm glad they picked Closest Thing to Heaven. It's the very last track there, which is one of my favorites ever by Tears for Fears. This is a great collection. It does have all the hits, 2 new tracks, and it spans their entire career, where some of the compilations only span maybe the first 3 albums. Now, 2022 comes along, and The Tipping Point, brand new Tears for Fears album. This is kind of a different album again. Now, I don't know if they meant to do this, but Everybody Loves a Happy Ending, the last album, was a lot of acoustic guitars, electric guitars, and they open this album with a song that's acoustic guitar based, almost like easing you back into where they left off and then heading into the future with the rest of the tracks. This is a great record, full of atmosphere, full of beautiful melodies. It's haunting, it's hopeful. There's lots of great tracks on here. Again, this is one of those things where you have to listen to it 2 or 3 times, but most of the album really hits you instantly. It doesn't go in the direction of Everybody Loves a Happy Ending, and it sort of embraces maybe their older stuff with electronics, but it still isn't quite that either. This is really Tears for Fears 2022. It's not them going backwards and saying, hey, let's just redo what we did before. This is them moving forward and creating new, beautiful, wonderful music. But again, very different from what they've done before. If you love older Tears for Fears, this is probably closer to their older sound than Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. But the songs are great. The songs are moody, melodic, really fantastic. Now, this version here is the one you can buy at Target. It has 2 bonus tracks. So if you want to get 2 bonus tracks, definitely head to Target or order online, and you'll get them. Now, I'm sure that there's other different versions out there, expanded 2 CD, 3 CD, Blu-ray, DVD. I can't afford all that stuff. I have to feed my framed Elvis poster. So anyway, that is it. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope it inspires you to go back and relive this wonderful, glorious music that this band has been putting out for 40 years. Anyway, that's it for me. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, ring that bell for future notifications, leave a comment, and until the next time, remember me, I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.